morning. You are looking at a map of a continent holding its breath.
You really are.
Yeah. As we survey the strategic landscape of Europe today, the radar screen isn't showing, well, the traditional distinct lines of a military front. Instead, we are seeing things like Romanian F-16s scrambling to intercept unidentified drones in the south,
Right.
while at the same time, commercial cargo ships in the Baltic Sea suddenly find their navigation systems just entirely blinded by invisible signal jamming. It is a pervasive fog of intersecting crises.
It absolutely is.
We are looking at a situation defined less by imminent overt warfare across the continent and more by a persistent, highly calculated testing of boundaries.
That is precisely the situation. And, it requires a very specific lens to understand. We naturally want international relations to be binary peace or war.
Sure, it's easier to process.
Exactly. They're comforting categories. But the current operational picture presents a landscape that operates almost entirely in the gray zone between those two extremes.
Right. And before we unpack exactly what that gray zone looks like, we want to thank our sponsor, ProWave AI, and announce that this deep dive is generated by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application.
Yes.
And for the official record, today's briefing is titled Stylo News Intel Update, Europe Situation Report, 28 July 2026. Now, for the listener who might be joining us for the first time, what exactly is the engine driving the intelligence we are analyzing today?
Well, Stylo News is essentially the consumer version of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Okay.
That is a platform traditionally engineered exclusively for enterprise operations. So we are talking government agencies, the military, and large-scale multinational business sectors.
So heavy-duty intelligence.
Very heavy-duty. It uses advanced vector search, which is a way for AI to understand the deep context and relationship between different pieces of data, rather than just looking for simple keywords.
That makes a huge difference.
It really does. And you combine that with a location AI bot that aggregates hundreds of traditional news sources alongside real-time social media intelligence, and you get a complete picture.
Right.
So as a listener, you have unique access today to a tool designed to support global decision makers in navigating these exact crises we're talking about.
Which is incredible. So our mission for this deep dive is to provide you with a calm, neutral, and strategic analysis of current conflict zones and flashpoints across the continent.
Exactly. No sensationalism, just the facts.
Right. We will examine the hybrid front in Northern Europe and the Baltic region, the attritional core of the conflict in Ukraine, the indirect pressure cooker of Southern Europe, and finally, the home front, how these pressures are fundamentally reshaping the political landscape ahead of the pivotal 2027 elections.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. So let us begin at NATO's northeastern edge, the Baltic region and Scandinavia. Based on the data streams, a large-scale conventional Russian attack across those borders is not imminent, correct?
That is correct. The geopolitical trackers hold with medium confidence that a near-term, large-scale conventional Russian attack on Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, or Scandinavia is unlikely.
Okay.
You are not going to see columns of tanks rolling across the border tomorrow. However, that does not mean the region is secure. The risk of what we call hybrid warfare is highly elevated.
Let's make sure we define that clearly for the listener. When we say hybrid warfare, what is the actual mechanism? I mean, how does an adversary attack a country without triggering NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause?
Well, hybrid warfare is a deliberate strategy of coercive, deniable actions. It is designed to inflict economic and psychological damage while staying just below the threshold of open war.
I see.
And we are seeing a very specific cluster of these activities right now. First, there are significant cyber threats. The Stylo dashboard specifically identifies advanced persistent threat groups like Sandworm and APT-28.
Right, those are well-known actors.
Yes, and they are not just stealing data, they are probing and prepositioning inside European government networks and energy grids.
Wow. And we are also seeing widespread GPS jamming affecting commercial and military navigation. I want to drill down on that for a second. How does jamming a GPS signal actually serve as a strategic weapon?
It creates instant, deniable chaos. When you jam or spoof GPS signals in a highly congested waterway like the Baltic Sea, commercial cargo ships literally lose their automated positioning.
Which is terrifying in a crowded sea lane.
Exactly. They have to rely on visual or legacy navigation. This slows down supply chains, increases the risk of maritime collisions, and critically, it drives up commercial insurance premiums.
Ah, so it's an economic weapon.
Precisely. Combine that with maritime signaling, where Russian Baltic and northern fleets run aggressive maneuvers close to territorial waters and a heightened risk of sabotage against undersea cables, and you create a perpetual state of crisis.
Geographically, the data highlights two extreme vulnerabilities here, the Suwalki Gap and Kaliningrad. For the listener visualizing the map, Kaliningrad is a highly militarized Russian exclave sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania on the Baltic Sea. And the Suwalki Gap is the narrow 60-mile stretch of land right next to it that connects Poland to Lithuania. If you close that gap, you physically cut off the Baltic states from the rest of NATO.
Which is a nightmare scenario for defense planners.
So it sounds like an adversary is testing the locks, rattling the windows, and cutting the phone lines to see what is loose rather than kicking down the front door.
That is exactly how decision makers in the region are interpreting it.
Yeah.
The Lithuanian defense minister recently issued a stark warning that Russia is actively seeking new pressure points, precisely because their battlefield progress elsewhere has stalled.
Right.
In response, Lithuania is implementing what they call a total defense concept. This is vital because it shifts the burden from just the military to the entire society.
Meaning what, exactly?
It involves civilian preparedness, hardened infrastructure, and societal resilience. Everyone plays a part.
And further south, officials in Warsaw have expressed deep concerns about Russia potentially using captured Ukrainian drones to conduct deniable strikes or false flag incidents on the Polish border.
Yes, that's a very real concern.
And when you look at the real-time sentiment analysis from social media platforms like X, it is clear the public is absorbing this tension. The data shows populations in the Baltics and Poland aren't just worried about geopolitics, they are mourning the loss of a, quote, peaceful life.
Yeah.
It feels like the psychological toll of this gray zone is almost as damaging as actual kinetic warfare.
It is designed to be exhausting. The goal of hybrid warfare is societal fatigue.
Wow.
So for the listener tracking this northern theater, watch for a massive prioritization of counterintelligence and the hardening of digital infrastructure across Scandinavia and the Baltics.
Okay, what specific operations should we look out for?
Operationally, you should track the expansion of the FairYJ anti-ballistic missile initiative. This is a regional air defense cooperation involving Nordic states and Ukraine.
Right.
The fact that they are building a unified defensive umbrella indicates these governments assess the threat of long-range drones and missiles as a permanent generational feature of their security environment.
But the gray zone tactics up north aren't happening in a vacuum, are they? They are essentially the pressure valves for the kinetic reality further south. Let us transition to the battlefield that is generating these continental shockwaves. Ukraine.
Right, the hot war.
What is the tactical reality on the ground right now?
Well, the tactical military situation is defined by a contested, brutal, attritional stalemate. Looking at the diplomatic channels, there is no near-term peace expected.
None at all.
None. Both Moscow and Kiev currently assess that maintaining battlefield pressure is more advantageous to their long-term strategic goals than seeking a compromise at the negotiating table.
And in an attritional war, it usually comes down to who can sustain the highest volume of fire. Russia currently maintains the initiative there, correct?
They do. Russia is exerting significant localized ground pressure, particularly on the Pokrovsk and Donetsk axis.
Okay.
They are relying heavily on massed fires, which simply means concentrating overwhelming artillery and rocket barrages on specific points along the zero line, the absolute front edge of the battlefield.
Right.
At the same time, they are sustaining massive aerial barrages against Ukrainian rear areas. For example, recent reporting documented an attack involving over 145 aerial weapons targeting Kiev and 10 other regions.
145, that's just a massive scale.
It is. And it demonstrates a continued capacity to generate mass strike packages designed to degrade Ukrainian energy infrastructure and break civilian morale.
But Ukraine is not just sitting in the trenches absorbing these blows.
No, absolutely not.
Because they face a disadvantage in raw manpower and artillery shells, the intelligence shows a distinct adaptation in their strategy. They are utilizing long-range drones to systematically disrupt Russian logistics deep within Russian territory and occupied areas.
Exactly. We call this an asymmetric deep strike capability.
Okay.
If you can't beat the enemy tank on the front line, you destroy the train carrying the fuel for that tank 100 miles away.
That makes perfect sense.
The targeting data pinpoints specific strikes. The Yeisk Air Base, rail infrastructure in central Crimea, numerous fuel depots, and critically, a wild berries distribution hub in Voronezh.
This is a fascinating pivot point, and I want to explore the mechanics of this. For the listener, wild berries is essentially a massive Russian equivalent to Amazon.
Exactly.
If both sides are locked in a grinding World War I style artillery duel, how does targeting a commercial logistics warehouse actually shift the strategic military needle?
It goes back to the concept of sustainment architecture. In a wartime economy, a massive commercial distribution center is inherently dual use.
Meaning it serves both civilian and military needs.
Exactly. It facilitates the movement of commercial goods, sure, but it is also easily co-opted to move military parts, winter gear, drone components, and rations that supply the front lines. It is a critical node.
Wow.
By striking these hubs, oil depots, and rail lines, Ukraine is forcing a massive operational dilemma on Moscow.
Because they can't protect everything at once.
Precisely. First, it physically degrades the supply of materials.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it forces the Russian command to pull highly valuable air defense systems away from the zero line to protect their domestic economic rear areas.
I see.
Every surface-to-air missile guarding a warehouse in Voronezh is a missile not protecting a trench in Donetsk.
Yet, as this tactical innovation occurs, the stamina of the international community is visibly fraying. The social media intelligence from X reveals a noticeable growth in Ukraine aid fatigue and anti-war sentiment among European publics.
It's very prominent in the data right now.
Yes, and we must note there is a vocal segment of users arguing that European leaders are ignoring public polling that favors diplomacy over continued conflict. Voters are feeling the economic strain, and we are just reporting what the sentiment data shows objectively.
Right. Maintaining that neutrality is key. The data simply reflects growing frustration.
Exactly. So the course of action to watch in this theater is continued Ukrainian asymmetric deep strikes against Russian economic architecture, specifically to compensate for the static conditions on the front line.
Which brings us to the ripple effects of this conflict, which are violently washing over southern Europe.
Right. Because Ukraine is successfully degrading Russian supply lines in the north and east, Moscow is increasingly relying on the Black Sea and Danube River routes. And that brings the war right to NATO's southeastern doorstep.
Yes, it does.
Let's look at the Black Sea-Danube-Mediterranean arc.
This region is a pressure cooker because it represents the convergence of two entirely distinct crises.
Okay, lay them out for us.
You have the direct spillover from the war in Ukraine, and you have the escalating tensions emanating from the Middle East. Looking at the Black Sea, the data highlights repeated incidents of suspected Russian drone incursions into Romanian airspace.
Which is NATO territory.
Exactly. Romania has had to scramble F-16 fighter jets to intercept these threats. Because Romania sits at the crucial junction of the Black Sea and the Danube logistics routes, Russia's willingness to risk drone spillover into NATO airspace here is a severe test of the alliance's defense architecture.
But the threat vector in the south isn't just Russian drones.
No, not at all. It is also the Middle East. The escalation involving Iran and its proxy networks poses a massive indirect threat to Europe.
Right, we've seen this in the news.
The instability in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait threatens global maritime trade and energy security. And here is where we find a core insight from the intelligence sniff.
For Southern Europe, geography is destiny.
Explain that. I mean, why does a crisis in the Red Sea disproportionately impact Italy or Greece compared to, say, Germany?
Because of the maritime routes. Italy, Greece, and Spain rely on the Mediterranean Sea as their primary economic artery.
Oh,
If commercial ships are attacked in the Red Sea and decide to reroute around the entire continent of Africa to avoid the danger, they completely bypass the Mediterranean.
oh, wow. They just don't go there at all.
Right, they dock in Northern Europe instead. That completely guts the economies of Southern European ports. Add to this the fact that there's a steady, elevated flow of migrants from North Africa, Sudan, and the Middle East seeking entry into these exact same Mediterranean countries, and you have a deeply pressurized environment. I have to pause here just to consider the sheer political reality of this. We are talking about governments that must manage global shipping crises that spike their energy costs, handle complex migration flows, and physically intercept Russian drones on their borders all simultaneously.
Yes.
Isn't this an impossible political burden for Southern European governments that are already managing deep internal divisions?
It is an incredibly fragile balancing act, and it is driving the decision-making of every leader in the region. Look at Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, for instance.
Right.
She is managing a domestic constituency that is highly reluctant to engage in any foreign conflict and is economically stressed by migration. Yet Italy is a cornerstone of NATO and hosts 9 critical U.S. military bases.
Including Aviano, right.
Yes, including Aviano, where U.S. warplanes recently deployed from to target Iranian assets. She has to constantly balance her alliance obligations with her own domestic political survival.
And we see similar tightropes elsewhere. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis is heavily focused on maintaining strong deterrence capabilities against Turkey, prioritizing regional border security despite the broader chaos.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, at the European Union level, there is intense internal friction. The EU is currently debating sanctions on Israeli settlements, which forces member states to awkwardly balance their commitments to international human rights law against their vital geopolitical and security alliances. Again, we are just presenting the different views here neutrally.
Right. The data shows a clear tension in priorities. So, for the listener tracking Southern Europe, the events to watch include heightened vigilance against non-specific terrorist threats,
Yeah.
particularly given the jihadist expansion we are seeing in the Sahel region of Africa.
Right.
And, of course, continued Russian hybrid pressure exploiting these exact migration and economic vulnerabilities.
All of which leads us directly to our final segment, the home front. These external pressures, the fear of Baltic hybrid attacks, Ukraine war fatigue, and Mediterranean instability, they are not staying in the borders.
No, they are bleeding inward.
They are crashing into domestic politics across the continent as we look toward a major election cycle in 2027.
The intelligence paints a picture of intense political turbulence. You have national elections approaching in France, Poland, Italy, and Spain.
It's a huge year for elections.
Massive. And the overarching theme across all of them is the friction between funding domestic social priorities and the urgent requirement for NATO rearmament.
It's the classic guns versus butter debate, but on an existential scale. It is literally a choice between funding civilian pensions and buying artillery shells.
Exactly. And we are seeing potential shifts in leadership that could alter the entire strategic map. In France, the data suggests the potential for a Marine Le Pen victory in 2027 is a critical variable.
Okay, and what would that mean operationally?
Well, her leadership could shift French policy toward reducing military aid for Ukraine in favor of seeking a rapid compromise with Russia.
Which would be a massive shift in European policy.
Huge. Simultaneously, European leaders are facing immense pressure from the United States, with President Trump pressing allies on defense spending commitments and threatening tariffs, which forces them to make highly unpopular domestic fiscal choices.
So when you look at the political reality, Europe seems to be trying to, well, rebuild the airplane while flying it through a storm.
That's a good way to put it.
They are attempting to balance long-term military rearmament with the immediate, loud demands of their voters for domestic stability.
That is a very apt analogy.
Uh-huh.
And the structural changes within these nations reflect that stress. In the United Kingdom, there is a major decentralization effort underway, establishing Number 10 North in Manchester.
Led by Andy Burnham, right.
Correct. It's aiming to shift political and economic gravity away from London to appease regional voters. In Turkey, President Erdogan's long-standing rule is being challenged by the rise of the Yeni Party, reshaping the opposition landscape. And in the Czech Republic, there is open political friction between Prime Minister Andrej Babija and President Petr Pavel over the fundamental direction of their foreign policy and NATO representation.
It's everywhere. And the sentiment on X regarding the European political landscape is deeply negative and skeptical right now.
Very much so.
Voters are expressing profound frustration over coalition instability, anger over the prospect of tax hikes to fund defense spending, and a recurring narrative accusing the European Union of undermining national sovereignty, particularly regarding immigration quotas and economic policy.
As we synthesize this entire operational picture, the summary is clear.
What's the bottom line?
The threat to Europe is currently elevated, but it's primarily hybrid and indirect in nature, a war of signal jamming, cyber probes, and logistics disruption, rather than an imminent conventional invasion of NATO territory.
Right.
The hot war in Ukraine remains locked in a brutal attritional phase. And as a direct result of these external stresses, the political and strategic posture of the entire continent is fundamentally shifting as it approaches the 2027 elections.
It is an incredibly complex web of information. Staying informed and cutting through that fog of gray zone warfare requires tools that can contextualize millions of data points instantly.
It's essential.
That is the purpose of Stylo News. It is an application available for your mobile device and computer that allows you to customize personal, intelligence-style briefs exactly like the one we've walked through today.
Right.
It utilizes data from hundreds of traditional news sources and X, featuring that location AI bot and vector search capability to give you the most accurate, real-time assessment of global events. We highly encourage you to subscribe and get AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
And before we conclude today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over.
Yeah.
We have discussed the intense political turbulence and the high risk of hybrid warfare, specifically the use of targeted disinformation to exhaust populations.
Right.
Given that tools like Stylo News are now putting enterprise, military-grade intelligence and data analysis directly into the hands of everyday citizens, how might this unprecedented access to raw, real-time data fundamentally change the way voters respond to those disinformation campaigns?
That's a great point.
If the fog of war is being systematically lifted for the public, how does that alter the battlefield of public opinion heading into those pivotal 2027 elections?
A truly fascinating question for you to carry forward. We want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the European Situation Report.
Thank you for listening.
We invite you to reach out and request topics for future deep dives. And please remember to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. When we began today, we talked about a radar screen filled with the invisible fog of gray zone warfare. While the storm is undoubtedly complex, we hope today's analysis has helped you see the structures hiding within it just a bit more clearly. Have a great day.